He walks, he stalks. It's the birth of one of the most iconic Goosebumps characters. Well, sort of. It's Night of the Living Dummy. Grab your books, everybody, and let's get Goosebumps. Hello, everybody. My name is Ryno, and welcome to Let's Get Goosebumps. This is the series where I and hopefully many of you out there attempt to read every one of the 62 original Goosebumps books by R.L. Stine in the year 2022 to celebrate this belovedly spooky franchise. Today, we are talking about book number 7, Night of the Living Dummy. Before we get started, I do just want to say I am a little bit behind still on reading, but I think there's still plenty of time to catch up. Honestly, I sat and read this in like a single sitting. So everybody out there, you just keep reading, keep on going, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. Let's talk a little bit about Night of the Living Dummy before we dive into it. This was published in May of 1993. It is 134 pages. The cover art was by Tim Jacobus again, and the cover tagline reads, "He walks, he stalks." And the back of the book says, "He's no dummy." Lindy names the ventriloquist dummy she finds Slappy. Slappy is kind of ugly, but he's a lot of fun. Lindy's having a great time learning to make Slappy move and talk, but Chris is jealous of all the attention her sister is getting. It's no fair. Why does Lindy always have all the luck? Chris decides to get a dummy of her own. She'll show Chris. This is one of the the misprinted backs here where they have the error in it. That's so funny because I just read about that online. Then weird things begin to happen. Nasty things, evil things. No way a dummy can be causing all the trouble. Or is there? Reader beware, you're in for a scare. So before we even, as we're, whatever. There isn't going to be no episode of the show for this one, which is shocking to me because this is such a popular one. But I believe there's episodes for Night of the Living Dummy 2, 3, and maybe The Bride. I think there's like 2 or 3 episodes, but they never did this one, which is really kind of fascinating here. I have a little bit of trivia I found online on the Goosebumps wiki. It was according to R.L. Stine, the idea of the first 3 Night of the Living Dummy books actually came from him reading The Adventures of Pinocchio when he was younger. Stine also had a ventriloquist dummy that he used to scare his brother with when he was a kid. I think that's hilarious. But Slappy, who's pictured on the cover here, actually replaced Curly the Skeleton, you remember him, purple mohawk, as the mascot for the series when it was revived in 2008. I do miss Curly, but Curly was never a character really in any of the things. So let's dive into the plot here. This one was kind of interesting. Lindy, so I'm just going to go right into it, okay? Lindy and Chris Powell are our main characters. They're twin sisters who are always in competition with each other. They're at home, and the mother's like, "Get outside, do something." You know, remember those days? Youth. Pre-internet. Although we wouldn't really be able to do this without the internet, so I shouldn't sigh so heavily about it. Anyway, the girls take a walk through the neighborhood and stop to check out this plot of land where a new house is being built. I actually think it's like being built right next to them, but my friend actually lived in an area that was being developed like this when we were kids, so this brought back like a lot of memories because there was a house like diagonally across the street from him that we used to play in like the wood chips and whatever piles over there, and it's amazing that we just didn't accidentally kill ourselves. So while the kids are there, there's like this big dumpster that Lindy goes diving into, and I actually want to read this part here because it got really dark like really quickly right here. So we're going to the bottom of page 8. "Over here," Lindy called. "I see something." It took Chris a while to locate her sister. Lindy was half hidden behind a large black trash dumpster at the far end of the yard. Chris shielded her eyes with one hand to see better. Lindy was bent over the side of the dumpster. She appeared to be rummaging through some trash. "What's in there?" Chris called. Lindy was tossing things around and didn't seem to hear her. "What is it?" Chris called, taking a few reluctant steps toward the dumpster. Lindy didn't reply. Then slowly she pulled something out. She started to hold it up, its arms and legs dangled down limply. Chris could see a head with brown hair. A head? Arms and legs? "Oh no," Chris cried out, raising her hands to her face in horror. "A child?" Chris uttered a silent gasp, staring in horror as Lindy lifted him out of the trash dumpster. She could see his face, frozen in a wide-eyed stare. His brown hair stood stiffly on top of his head. He seemed to be wearing some sort of a gray suit. His arms and legs dangled lifelessly. Lindy, Chris called, her throat tight with fear. Is he alive? Her heart pounding, Chris started to run to her sister. Lindy was cradling the poor thing in her arms. Is he alive? Chris repeated breathlessly. She stopped short when her sister started to laugh. No, not alive, Lindy called gleefully, and then Chris realized that it wasn't a child after all. A dummy, she shrieked. Lindy held it up. A ventriloquist dummy, she said. Someone threw him out. Do you believe it? He's in perfect shape. It took Lindy a while to notice that Chris was breathing hard, her face bright red. Chris, what's your problem? Oh, wow. Did you think that this was a real kid? Lindy laughed scornfully. No, of course not, Chris insisted. Um, I just think so. I mean, the scare here is that this is a dead kid in a dumpster. So I was like, wow, okay, that's scary. But anyway, so Lindy decides that she's going to name this ventriloquist dummy Slappy. That's right. This is the one and only Slappy. And I never realized, I think, that somebody named him. In my brain, I have it that was his name somehow already. Like it was written on him somewhere, like on his clothes or something like that. But I don't know. I guess I was wrong. So they take the dummy home, and Lindy likes putting on shows with him, and she gets pretty good at it. So she gets booked at like a kid's birthday party, and she's doing well for herself. So Chris starts to get jealous, of course. And Lindy is putting on a show for her parents one night, and Chris just bursts out, "I want a dummy too." Lindy and Chris' parents asked the two girls to just share the dummy because they don't want to invest in another one, assuming that they'll do what kids always do and just get bored of it and stop. So Chris tries to take Slappy from Lindy, and Slappy slaps Chris right in the face. And I got to read this part because it got intense real quick too. So we are going to turn to page 20 right here. Okay, so first of all, sorry, while we're flipping through, I meant to bring this up. I don't know if anybody else's copy is like this, but mine is so thin compared to like other Goosebump books. Like, not because it's different page length wise, but it's like almost like I have a reader, like a preview copy or something like that. Like the pages are almost like tracing paper thin. It's crazy. But anyway, so we're going to go to page 20. Chris climbed to her feet and walked over to Lindy. She reached out for the dummy. I don't mind sharing, she said quietly, searching for her sister's eyes for approval of the idea. Can I hold him for just a second? Lindy held on to Slappy tightly. Suddenly, the dummy's head tilted back and his mouth opened wide. Beat it, Chris, he snarled in a harsh, raspy voice. Get lost, you stupid moron. Before Chris could back away, Slappy's wooden hand shot up, and he slapped her hard across the face. Ow, Chris screamed and raised her hand to her cheek, which was bright pink. She stepped back. Stop it, Lindy. That hurt. Me, Lindy cried. I didn't do it. Slappy did. Don't be dumb, Chris protested, rubbing her cheek. You really hurt me. But I didn't do it, Lindy cried. She turned Slappy's face toward her. Why were you so rude to Chris? Mr. Powell jumped up from the couch. Stop acting dumb and apologize to your sister, he ordered. Lindy bowed Slappy's head. I'm sorry, she made the dummy say. No, in your own voice, Mr. Powell insisted, crossing his arms in front of his chest. Slappy didn't hurt Chris. You did. That night, Chris has a bad dream that she's being chased by something. This dream doesn't really ever play out. She has it like repeatedly, so maybe she's just a girl who's always running from something. But she wakes up and Slappy is sitting in the chair, staring at her. Chris goes to grab him, and Lindy scares Chris by grabbing her wrists. We're sort of establishing right here that Lindy keeps pranking and scaring Chris, and Chris is scared of everything. So Mr. Powell ends up buying another ventriloquist dummy for Chris that he found at a pawn shop. She names him Mr. Wood. So now Chris is doing her thing, and Lindy is doing her thing, and Chris says that the music teacher at the school, Mrs. Berman, has asked her to perform a ventriloquist act for the school's upcoming spring concert. It's a big deal. Lindy offers to help Chris improve her act, which is definitely a passive-aggressive dig, but Mr. Wood, who at the moment is being held by Lindy, begins hurling insults at Chris. Chris assumes that Lindy is the one speaking, but Lindy insists that she isn't controlling the dummy. That night, Lindy and Chris hear strange noises coming from inside their house. When they go to investigate, they find Mr. Wood strangling Slappy. When the sisters tell their mother what happened, Mrs. Powell doesn't believe them. She tells the girls, go to bed. And there's actually like a fun little nod to horror here because the mother is reading a Stephen King book, which I think is really fun because they bring up Stephen King in the 2015 Goosebumps movie as well. Chris decides she's going to put Mr. Wood in the closet for the night, has another nightmare, wakes up to see Mr. Wood with his arm around Slappy, sitting in the chair, staring at her like they've just pulled off a prank of some sort. So a couple of days are going to go by, and then Lindy comes home with the announcement that she and Slappy may be on TV. Chris is jealous again. So that night, Lindy wakes up to see Chris leaving the room to get water. Chris screams from the kitchen, and Lindy runs down to her. Mr. Wood is lying near the refrigerator with food all around him. There's milk spilled everywhere. It's chaos, and he is dressed to the nines in all of Chris's jewelry. Mrs. Powell goes downstairs. She sees the mess, and they both say it wasn't them. So she's like, well, I'm taking both of the dummies away from you then because obviously one of you is lying. So they tell the mother they're going to clean everything up. They're going to make it look spotless as long as they can keep their dummies. They clean up the mess. Chris throws Mr. Wood in the closet, and this is when she hears him saying, let me out of here. And the big reveal right here is that Lindy has been causing this mayhem all along. She was trying to mess with Chris for always copying her with anything that she does, so she wanted to scare her and make her think that the dummy was alive. I think this is a pretty fun twist, and I think it's a nice setup for why Lindy will not believe Chris at this point and thinks she's just copying her what she just did again. So a couple of days go by and Chris is practicing for her show when she finds a small piece of paper that's like tucked inside of Mr. Wood's pocket. And I want to read this part that is starting at the bottom of page 81. She arranged Mr. Wood on her lap. Time to go to work, she made him say, reaching into his back to move his lips. She made his eyes slide back and forth. A button on his plaid shirt had come unbuttoned. Chris leaned him down against the dresser table and started to fasten it. Something caught her eye, something yellow inside of the pocket. Weird, Chris said out loud. I never noticed anything in there. Slipping 2 fingers into the slender pocket, she pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper, folded up. Probably just the receipt for him, Chris thought. She unfolded the sheet of paper and held it up to read it. It wasn't a receipt. The paper contained a single sentence, handwritten very cleanly in bold black ink. It was in a language Chris didn't recognize. Did someone send you a love note, Mr. Wood? She asked the dummy. It stared up lifelessly at her. Chris lowered her eyes to the paper and read the strange sentence out loud. Karu, Mari, Odana, Loma, Molonu, Karano. What language is that, Chris wondered. She glanced down at the dummy and uttered a low cry of surprise. Mr. Wood appeared to blink. But that wasn't possible. Was it? Chris took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. The dummy stared up at her, his painted eyes as dull and wide open as ever. Let's not get paranoid, Chris scolded herself. Time to work, Mr. Wood, she told him. She folded up the piece of yellow paper, slipped it back into his shirt pocket. Then she raised him to a sitting position, searching for the eye and mouth controls with her hand. How are things around your house, Mr. Wood? Not good, Chris. I've got termites. I need termites like I need another hole in my head. Ha ha. Yeah, so I'll talk about what I think about the little charm there at the end here. But anyway, later that night, the Powells' older neighbors come for a visit, and the parents insist the kids put on a little bit of a show for them. So Lindy decides to go first. Great success. Chris goes to perform, and Mr. Wood insults the Millers, making fun of their appearance, their teeth, their breath. The neighbors are offended. Parents are mortified, of course. And Chris tries to tell Lindy it wasn't her and the dummy is alive. And Lindy is like, you're such a copycat. Here we go again. I already did this prank on you. So we cut forward a little bit. We get to the performance night for Chris. She says that I think it's like 2 days later because she's like, Mr. Wood has been good for the last couple of days, like a loon. At the concert, Mrs. Berman runs out to help adjust a microphone for Chris. And when this happens, Mr. Wood goes off on this poor woman. So this entire scene is just another one of those like quick, like 0 to 60 insane moments. So I'm just going to read it. It takes such a weird turn. This is on toward the bottom of page 92. Are you having trouble? Mrs. Berman called from the side of the stage. She hurried over to help Chris, but before the music teacher got halfway across the stage, Mr. Wood leaned into the microphone. What time does the blimp go up? He rasped nastily, staring at Mrs. Berman's dress. What? She stopped in surprise. Your face reminds me of a wart I had removed, Mr. Wood growled at the startled woman. Her mouth dropped open in horror. Chris! If we count your chins, will it tell us your age? There was laughter floating up from the audience, but it was mixed with gasps of horror. Chris, that's enough, Mrs. Berman cried, the microphone picking up her angry protest. You're more than enough. You're enough for two, Mr. Wood declared nastily. If you got any bigger, you'd be your own zip code. Chris, really, I'm going to ask you to apologize, Mrs. Berman said, her face bright red. Mrs. Berman, I'm not doing it, Chris stammered. I'm not saying these things. Please apologize to me and to the audience, Mrs. Berman demanded. Mr. Wood leaned into the microphone. Apologize for this, he screamed. The dummy's head tilted back, his jaw dropped, his mouth opened wide, and a thick green liquid came spewing out. Yuck, someone screamed. It looked like pea soup. It spurted up out of Mr. Wood's open mouth like water rushing from a fire hose. Voices screamed and cried out, their surprise as thick green liquid showered over the people in the front rows. Stop it! Help! Somebody turn it off! It stinks! Chris froze in horror, staring as more and more of the disgusting substance poured from her dummy's gaping mouth. A putrid stench, the smell of sour milk, rotten eggs, burning rubber, decayed meat, rose up from the liquid. It puddled over the stage and showered over the front seats. Blinded by the spotlight, Chris couldn't see the audience in front of her, but she could hear the choking and the gagging, the frantic cries for help. Clear the auditorium! Clear the auditorium! Mrs. Berman was shouting. Chris heard the rumble and scrape of people shoving their way up the aisles and out the doors. It stinks! I'm sick! Somebody help! Chris tried to clamp her hand over the dummy's mouth, but the force of the putrid green liquid frothing and spewing out was too strong. It pushed her hand away. Suddenly, she realized she was being shoved from behind, off the stage, away from the shouting people fleeing the auditorium, out of the glaring spotlight. She was backstage before she realized that it was Mrs. Berman who was pushing her. I don't know how you did that or why, Mrs. Berman shouted angrily, frantically wiping splotches of the disgusting green liquid off the front of her dress with both hands. But I'm going to see that you're suspended from school, Chris. And if I have my way, she sputtered, you'll be suspended for life. Some of us like to call that expulsion, but, you know, to each his own. This scene, nasty. Also, like, it kind of took me, like, for a shock, a little bit of a surprise. So, anyway, so we got that nasty performance. Mr. Powell, they get home. Mr. Powell's like, you're going to lock Mr. Wood in that closet, and he's going to be returned to the pawn shop on Monday. And that night, Chris wakes up to the sound of footsteps, and when she goes to investigate, she discovers that Mr. Wood is, in fact, alive. Mr. Wood tells her that she and Liddy are now going to be his slaves, and that the magic words she spoke are what brought him to life. So there's, like, this scuffle that ensues that gets a little, like, kind of violent. And anyway, Chris screams for help. Lindy hears her and goes downstairs. She finds out what happened. Well, Chris tells her sister that the dummy is live. This is when Mr. Wood surprises the girls. Like I said, scuffling. Lindy manages to pin the dummy to the ground and keep him from fleeing. When the girls' parents arrive, Mr. Wood stops moving. He plays dead, much like the toys in Toy Story, I feel like. Lindy and Chris try to explain what has happened, but their parents refuse to believe the girls. Mr. and Mrs. Powell begin to question Chris's mental well-being, suggesting that she should maybe be taken to a doctor. And as soon as the parents leave, Mr. Wood comes back to life, insisting that Lindy and Chris are his slaves. This is when the girls attempt to decapitate this dummy by yanking his head off. But they can't do it. He's too strong. He won't shut up about having powers that he never actually uses, other than that green vomit. But since they can't pop this guy's head off, they decide to throw him in a suitcase and bury him in the yard where that house was being built. So when they wake up the next morning, they find Mr. Wood, unfortunately, covered in dirt in their kitchen. The parents have gone out, so there's no help to be found. And this is when it gets super dark, kind of scary again, because this dummy tries to choke their dog, Barky, to death. So I'm going to read to you from page 126 right here. Because it's pretty scary, I'm not going to lie. But the dummy moved quickly. He reached down and grabbed Barky by the neck with both hands. As the dummy tightened his grip, the frightened terrier began to howl in pain. I warned you, Mr. Wood snarled over the howls of the little black terrier. You will do as I say, or one by one, those you love will suffer. No, Chris cried. Barky let out a high-pitched whelp, a bleat of pain that made Chris shudder. Let go of Barky, Chris screamed. The dummy giggled. Barky... uttered a hoarse gasp. Chris couldn't stand it any longer. She and Lindy leapt at the dummy from two sides. Lindy tackled his legs. Chris grabbed Barky and tugged. Lindy dragged the dummy to the floor, but his wooden hands held a tight grip on the dog's throat. Barky's howls became muffled whimper as she struggled to breathe. Let go, Chris shrieked. I warned you, the dummy snarled as Lindy held tight to his kicking legs. The dog must die now. No, Chris let go of the gasping dog. She slid her hands down the dummy's wrist. Then with a fierce tug, she pulled the wooden hands apart. Barky dropped to the floor, wheezing. He scampered to the corner, his paws sliding frantically over the smooth floor. You'll pay now, Mr. Wood growled. Jerking free from Chris, he swung his wooden hand up, landing a hard blow on Chris's forehead. She cried out in pain and raised her hands to her head. She heard Barky yipping loudly behind her. Let go of me, Mr. Wood demanded, turning back to Lindy, who was still held onto his legs. No way, Lindy cried. Chris, grab his arms again. Her head still throbbing, Chris lunged forward to grab the dummy's arms, but he lowered his head as she approached and clamped his wooden jaws down around her wrist. Ow! Chris howled in pain and pulled back. Lindy lifted the dummy up by the legs, then slammed his body hard against the floor. He uttered a furious growl and tried to kick free of her. Chris lunged again and this time grabbed one arm, then the other. He lowered his head to bite once more, but she dodged away and pulled his arms tight behind his back. I'm warning you, he bellowed. I'm warning you. Barky yipped excitedly, hopping up on Chris. What do we do with him? Lindy cried, shouting over the dummy's angry threats. Outside, Chris yelled, pressing the arms more tightly behind Mr. Wood's back. So the kids take the dummy outside, where there's like two steamrollers at work at that house next door, and they are like, okay, we're going to throw him under here. But another scary moment, the dog is loose, and so they like drop the dummy and then save the dog, thank goodness, from being run over. The dummy breaks, he's loose, like I said, and he's like, haha, you can't stop me. And he turns to run away, doesn't see the other steamroller, and crunch, he did. So I'm just gonna read the part where this happens, because it's also very like, oh god, graphic sort of. This is on page 132. God, these pages are so thin. So Mr. Wood turned and started to run. He never saw the other steamroller. The gigantic black wheel rolled right over him, pushing him onto his back, then crushing him with a loud crunch. A loud hiss rose up from under the machine like air escaping from a large balloon. The steamroller appeared to rock back and forth. A strange green gas spurted up from beneath the wheel into the air, spreading out into an eerie, mushroom-shaped cloud. Barky stopped scampering and stood frozen in place, his eyes following the green gas as it floated up against the nearby black sky. Lindy and Chris stared in open-mouthed wonder. Pushed by the wind and the rain, the green gas floated over them. Yuck, it stinks, Lindy declared. It smelled like rotten eggs. Barky uttered a low whimper. The steamroller backed up. The driver jumped out and came running toward them. He was a short, stocky man with big, muscular arms bulging out from the sleeves of his t-shirt. Hello. His face was bright red under a short, blonde flat top, his eyes wide with horror. A kid? He cried. I ran over a kid. My God, this is dark again. No, he was a dummy, Chris told him. He wasn't alive. He stopped. His face faded from red to flower white. He uttered a loud, grateful sigh. Oh, man, he moaned. Oh, man, I thought it was a kid. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then he bent to examine the area beneath his wheel. As the girls came near, they saw the remains of the dummy, crushed flat inside its jeans and flannel shirt. Hey, I'm real sorry, the man said, wiping his forehead with his t-shirt sleeve as he straightened up to face them. I couldn't stop in time. That's okay, Chris said, a wide smile forming on her face. Yeah, really, it's okay, Lindy quickly agreed. Barky moved close to sniff the crushed dummy. The man shook his head. I'm so relieved. It looked like it was running. I really thought it was a kid. I was so scared. Nope, just a dummy, Chris told him. Whew, the man exhaled slowly. Close one. His expression changed. What are you girls doing out in the rain anyways? Lindy shrugged. Chris shook her head. Just walking the dog. The man picked up the crushed dummy. The head crumbled to powder as he lifted it. You want this thing? You can throw it in the trash, Chris told him. Better get out of the rain, he told them, and don't scare me like that again. The girls apologized, then headed back to the house. Chris cast a happy grin at her sister. Lindy grinned back. I may grin forever, Chris thought. I'm so happy, so relieved. They wiped their wet sneakers on the mat, then held the kitchen door open for Barky. Wow, what a morning, Lindy declared. They followed the dog into the kitchen. Outside, a flash of bright lightning was followed by a roar of thunder. I also love this setting where it started to rain, and now it's lightning outside. And you're like, oh, it's the end of the book. There's literally just this little part left. I'm drenched, Chris said. I'm going up to get changed. Me too, Lindy followed her up the stairs. They entered their bedroom to find the window wide open, the curtains slapping wildly, rain pouring in. Oh no, Chris hurried across the room to shut the window. As she leaned over the chair to grab the window frame, Slappy reached up and grabbed her arm. Hey, slave, is that other guy gone, the dummy ass in a throaty growl? I thought he'd never leave. Boom, end of book. That's the end of the book. Isn't that crazy? That's the end for now. There's like several other of these books, and obviously Slappy gets his own spinoff. But anyway, my overall thoughts on this one. For some reason, I did have a little bit of like a mental blockage when I started reading it. So it took me like a second to get into it. I honestly think it might have something to do with like the kids' names. Just like Lindy, for some reason, I kept wanting to call her Liddy, and like so it's just in my head. I'm like, oh, her name's Liddy. It's not. It's Lindy, and so I just I don't know. And then it was in the third person again too, but I guess that's so they could switch back and forth between the girls. But honestly, I think it was just me. I'm not. It's not a comment on the writing or anything like that. I think there was just something going on in my brains in terms of like the rhythm and the vocabulary that was used in the book. And I know that makes like zero sense, but once it got going, this was a pretty good story. A highlight for me, like I said earlier, was that twist that was like 2/3 of the way through the book. I think it was around like chapter 18. 15 or like 18 something. I like how the sister admitted that she had been messing with the whole sister the entire book. So all the stuff she'd done was to just drive the sister insane because so Lindy was doing it all because Chris was always trying to be just like her and copycat her. So I really, really enjoyed that. I mean, we the reader, I feel like we know better, but still I thought it was an interesting route to take and then, have Chris be terrorized by an actual living dummy, so then like nobody really believes her. So it's really interesting. I do think it was a little weird that Mr. Wood just kept saying he had powers but didn't use any of them. And also, like Slappy had powers in the movies, or like more so in the second one. And actually, after reading this one, it makes me see how the second Goosebumps movie, which is Goosebumps Haunted Halloween, is a lot closer to being like an actual like a Goosebumps book, like a story instead of it being like how the first one was more like Jumanji esque, but with Goosebumps. So it was a little meta. So it's in my opinion, I feel like after like reading this and then thinking about that, I think it was a mistake to make that like a direct sequel, and it should have. I think it would have been better if it had actually just been like a Goosebumps story starring Slappy, and not have continued on from the first one because it's barely a sequel to the first one, only really toward the end. But I digress. We'll talk about the movies more when we get further down the road. I think when we're done reading all of these books. But it's crazy to me how iconic that Slappy has become too, because he's like literally he's not even the terrorizer in this original book. It's very Friday the 13th, where it was oh my god, I can't remember Jason's mother, but it wasn't Jason in the first one, and everyone always thinks, oh, Jason is the main killer, but it was Mrs. Voorhees. That's it. That's the name. But yeah, so I thought that was really kind of crazy and interesting, because like Slappy is on the cover. He's the one on the cover, and it's just another one of those like classic Goosebumps twists, I think, where it plays with your expectations. I just really love how it really does that and kind of stays true to the idiom of like, don't judge a book by its cover, because like quite literally you can't do that with a Goosebumps book. So but surprisingly enough, this book doesn't have an episode of the show. However, the sequel, Night of the Living Dummy, definitely does too, or Night of the Living Dummy 2, I'm sorry. So I'd be interested to see. I can't wait till we get to the other books, because I'm really interested to see how this story of like Slappy plays out more, and what they would do with that. Because honestly, I know I've read them, but I can't remember basically anything about them, barely. So like this one, I really didn't remember anything about it. I didn't remember the other dummy or anything like that, but I know I read this one because there was a sheet of homework from when I was a kid that was in this book. Actually, it's my brother's homework, which is crazy, from the year 1995. Insane. But it just got tucked in here. I'm going to leave it in there. It's a little monument to the past. But I'm going to be curious too to see how that 30th anniversary book that's coming out in September ties into this, if at all, because this is technically the first appearance of Slappy in Goosebumps. I don't know if any of the other books later down the road go back a little bit further, but that book that's coming out, that takes place as like an origin story for him. So I want to see how solid the timeline is of Slappy. So we're going to have to read that one, I think. But again, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do a special episode or something like that. But I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't, because we shouldn't like stop in the middle. we'll figure it out when we get there. September's a long way away, but I did, when I was making my notes for this book, see that Mr. Wood is brought up again, though. 24 years later, after this printing of this book, he's in one called I Am Slappy's Evil Twin. He's in like the prologue or something like that. So I don't know. We're going to have to see how this all plays out, because this might end with me actually reading those other Goosebumps books too. So as of now, I only had the intention to read the original 62, but we have to get all 62 of the original read by December 31st, 2022. That is our goal together. So next up, we're going to do The Girl Who Cried Monster. And I do remember a little bit of this. Like I remember like one scene with the teacher that she kind of sees him like eating something. I mean, that is the cover, but I'm pretty sure this is a scene straight out of the book. So I'm very excited to read this. I'm very excited to continue this journey with all of you out there. So you'll have to leave me some comments and let me know what you thought of this book. You can get in touch with me on my social media. Everywhere is Ryno, RYNO 1185. And of course, you can always send me an email at letsgetgoosebumps@gmail.com. And that is the title of the podcast, just without the exclamation point. So letsgetgoosebumps@gmail.com. And comments on the video. If you're listening, I don't know, can rate and review it, I guess. I think that helps other people find it. And I will try and do my best to catch up and keep up. And I hope everybody out there is doing good. Let me know what you think. We need to talk about the book. We have some pretty iconic one. I think the next most iconic one for me is going to be The Haunted Mask, which is number 11. So I'm just excited to go through all of these. So thank you everybody out there for reading and listening and just hanging out and having some fun with me. I hope you're all doing well, and I will see you next time. Stay creepy, everybody.